My name is Eleanor Whitcomb, and I am 84 years old. I have buried a husband, two of my closest friends, and a version of myself that most people would have told me to keep. I live alone now in a yellow house with a porch that catches the morning light, and every summer, when the air turns thick and green and the lake wind finds its way through my screen door, I think about a boy named Emmett Shaw. I have now outlived him by 61 years. He was 22 when I lost him. He never saw the ocean. He never saw a television. He never held a grandchild or paid off a house or grew old and boring and safe the way the rest of us are lucky enough to do. He got 6 days with me, and then a fire took the rest. Everyone who knew the story thought I was lucky to survive that night at the Grand Lakemore Hotel. They said it for years. Lucky girl, blessed girl, walked out of that inferno without a mark. What they never understood, what I never told a single soul until I was old enough that it couldn't hurt anyone anymore, is that I very nearly didn't walk out at all. And they never knew what Emmett gave me before the fire took him. It wasn't a ring. It wasn't a promise. It was smaller than that, and it was bigger than anything I have owned since. Before I tell you the rest, let me say this. If you are new here, take a moment and subscribe, because these are the stories I wish someone had told me when I was young and afraid. And do something for me while you are at it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight, and what the weather is doing outside your window right now. I read every one of them, and I like to imagine all of you out there, in all your different weathers, listening to an old woman remember. It helps more than you know. Let me take you back to the summer of 1928. Let me take you back to the girl I was before I knew what I was capable of wanting. I was 19 years old, and I was the daughter of a family that had run out of money without running out of pride. That is a dangerous combination. My father, Harold Whitcomb, had been a man of some importance in our town once. He owned a share of a mill and a share of a bank and a large white house on Chestnut Street with columns that impressed everyone who drove past. But by the time I was 17, the mill had failed, and the bank had been swallowed by a bigger bank, and the White House on Chestnut Street was mortgaged twice over. My father took to his study and his brandy and stopped answering the telephone. And my mother, Vivian, took to the only project she had left. Me. I need you to understand my mother, because she is the closest thing this story has to a villain, and she was not a monster. She was frightened. She had been raised to believe that a woman was a boat that needed a harbour, and she had watched her own harbour rot out from under her. So when she looked at me, she did not see a daughter. She saw a last chance. She saw a way to tie the family to something that would not sink, that something had a name. Preston Vane. The Vanes owned railroads, or pieces of railroads, and steel, or pieces of steel, and a great deal of land that other people paid them to stand on. Preston was 28, handsome in the way a bank lobby is handsome, all polished surfaces and cold marble. He had chosen me the way a man chooses a horse at a Christmas party from across a room, based on my posture and my family name, and the fact that I did not talk too much. Within a month, my mother had arranged the rest. We were, as she liked to say, an understanding. Not engaged, not yet. An understanding. I remember the afternoon I tried to tell her I was not sure. I was sitting at the kitchen table, and she was standing at the sink with her back to me, and I said the words carefully, the way you carry a full cup across a room. Mother, I do not think I love him. She did not turn around. She kept washing the same clean plate. We do not have the luxury of love, Eleanor. That was the sentence. She would say it again and again over the months that followed, in a dozen different rooms, until it stopped sounding like a sentence and started sounding like a law of nature. We do not have the luxury of love. as if love were a summer house or a second car, something for other people, richer people, people who could afford to be foolish. I believed her. That is the part that shames me now. For a long time, I believed her completely. In July of that year, the Vanes invited us to the Grand Lakemore Hotel for the closing week of the season. This was a summons dressed as a kindness. The Lakemore was the grandest resort in 3 states, a vast wooden palace built right at the edge of Lake Marrow, with white balconies stacked 6 stories high and a dance hall that could hold 400 people, and a dock that ran so far out into the water it seemed to touch the horizon. The Vanes went every August. The whole hotel would fill with people like them, people who owned pieces of things, and there would be a week of dinners and boat races and a grand gala on the final night, with fireworks over the lake. My mother packed my trunk like she was preparing an offering, the right dresses, the right gloves, her own mother's pearls, the last valuable thing our family owned, fastened around my throat like a leash made of moonlight. On the train up, she held my hand and told me this was the week Preston would formally propose, and that I would say yes, and that everything depended on it. I looked out the window at the pine trees going by, and I felt the pearls at my throat, and I thought, so this is what a life feels like when someone else has already lived it for you. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know some of you understand exactly what I am describing. If you have ever felt like your life was a room that other people decorated, a plan that other people drew up before you were old enough to hold the pencil, then you and I are not so different. Stay with me, because everything is about to change. We arrived at the Lakemore on a Saturday, and the first thing I noticed was the sound. Underneath the clink of glasses and the murmur of important men, underneath all of it, there was music, a piano. Somewhere at the far end of the great veranda, someone was playing, and it was not the careful, corseted music you heard at my mother's teas. It was loose and warm and a little wild, like the person playing it had somewhere better to be and had decided this was it. That was the first time I heard Emmett Shaw, though I did not know his name yet, and I did not see his face. I just heard the piano, and I felt something in my chest come loose that had been fastened tight for a very long time. I met him properly 2 days later, and it was an accident, or it was fate, and at 84, I have stopped believing those are different things. Preston had gone off to smoke cigars with the men and discuss whatever men discuss when they want to feel large. My mother was resting, and I did something I was not supposed to do. I walked away from the hotel, past the manicured lawns, past the tennis courts, down toward the working end of the dock where the guests did not go, where the boats were kept, where a young man in shirt sleeves was on his knees, fixing the engine of a small wooden launch with grease on his hands and a cap pushed back on his head, and the exact expression of a person who is completely, gloriously absorbed in what he is doing. He looked up. He had the kind of face you trust before you decide to. Brown eyes, a crooked front tooth, a jaw that had not been shaved that morning. You are the vain girl. It was not a question, and it was not friendly, and it was not unfriendly. It was just true, and it landed on me like a small stone. I am not anyone's girl, I told him, and I surprised myself, because until that moment I had been quite sure that I was. He sat back on his heels and looked at me for a long second, and then he smiled, and the smile changed his whole face. Well, that is the first interesting thing anyone has said to me all summer. His name was Emmett Shaw. He was 22. He played piano in the hotel band 6 nights a week, and in the daytime he fixed the boats and the motors and anything else that broke, which at a wooden hotel by a lake was a great many things. He had grown up 200 miles south in a river town I had never heard of, the son of a woman who took in washing, and a father who had left before Emmett could remember his face. He had exactly one good jacket, which he wore to play piano and nowhere else. He owned a compass, a harmonica, and a battered book of poems with the cover half torn off. That was the whole inventory of Emmett Shaw's earthly possessions, and he carried them the way rich men carry nothing, lightly, like a man who has already made peace with losing everything and therefore cannot be threatened with it. I had never met anyone like him. In my world, every single person was afraid of losing money, losing standing, losing the good opinion of people they did not even like. Emmett was not afraid of anything, because he had already been to the bottom and found it was not so bad. And that was the most attractive thing I had ever encountered in my life. Not his face, not the piano, his freedom. We talked for an hour on that dock. I do not remember all of it. I remember that he asked me questions no one had ever asked me. Not what my father did, not who I was marrying, not what my plans were. He asked me what I loved. He asked me if I had ever swum in the lake at night. He asked me, and I will never forget this, whether I actually liked the man I was going to marry, or whether I just liked being told what to do because it was easier than deciding. No one had ever spoken to me like I was a person with an inside. I should go, I said finally, because I was frightened by how much I did not want to. He stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. Before you do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the compass, the brass one, worn smooth from years of his thumb. He did not give it to me, not then. He just held it up so it caught the light. You look like someone who has spent her whole life letting other people tell her which way is north, he said, and I want you to know something. He turned the compass over in his hand. North is wherever you decide it is. Everything else is just people hoping you will not figure that out. North is wherever you decide it is. I have thought about that sentence every day for 61 years. I thought about it at my wedding. I thought about it when my children were born. I thought about it in kitchens and hospital rooms and the front seats of cars. North is wherever you decide it is. He was 22 years old, a boat mechanic with grease on his hands, and he handed me the compass of my entire life on a dock at the end of the world. If you have ever had someone see you, really see you, when everyone else was too busy managing you to look, then you know the particular terror of it. Because once you have been seen, you can never again pretend you do not exist. I want to pause here and say something to those of you listening tonight who have ever loved someone your family did not approve of. Someone from the wrong side of town, the wrong family, the wrong bank account. Tell me about it in the comments. I think there are more of us than anyone admits, people who were told that love was a luxury we could not afford. I would like to know I am not the only one. And if this story is finding you at the right moment, do me a kindness and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The next 6 days were the only days of my life that were entirely my own. I became a liar. I became very good at it, very fast, which surprised me because I had always been such an obedient girl. But obedience, I was learning, is just a habit, and habits can be broken in an afternoon if the reason is good enough. My reason was good enough. I told my mother I was walking. I told Preston I had headaches. I told everyone I was resting. And instead I was down at the dock, or out on the water in a little rowboat, or sitting on an overturned crate behind the dance hall in the last light of the evening, listening to Emmett practice, watching his hands. He took me places the guests never saw. There was a cove on the far side of the lake, reachable only by boat, where the water went still and gold at dusk, and the loons called across the surface like they were grieving something beautiful. He rowed me there on the third evening, and we sat in the boat and did not talk, and he took out his harmonica and played something slow, and I understood for the first time in my life that a person could be happy, not comfortable, not secure, not well married, happy. It was a completely different substance than anything I had been raised to want, and I was starving for it. There was a boat race on the third day, one of the grand events of the week. The guests in their whites lining the dock to watch the little sailing boats cut across the lake. Preston had entered, of course, or rather, Preston had paid a man to sail his boat while he watched and took the credit, which I have found is how a certain kind of man does most things. And I stood beside my mother in my good hat, and I clapped when I was supposed to clap, and the whole time my eyes kept drifting down the shore to where Emmett stood among the staff, watching the same water, and once, just once, across all that distance and all that difference, he caught my eye, and he tipped his cap, the smallest gesture, invisible to everyone but me, and I felt it land in my chest like sunlight. My mother asked me why I was smiling. I told her I loved a good race. I was learning to lie so smoothly it frightened me. But here is the truth, I could not tell her. I was not smiling at the boats. I was smiling because for the first time in my life, in a crowd of 400 people, there was one person in the world who saw me and not my name. On the afternoon of the fourth day, it rained. Not a gentle rain, a real one, the kind that comes off a lake in a grey wall and soaks you before you can find shelter. I had walked down to the dock anyway, because I could not stay away, and Emmett grabbed my hand and we ran, laughing, into the old boathouse at the end of the pier, and we stood there dripping while the rain drummed on the tin roof and the whole world outside turned to silver. There was a half-built boat in there, up on sawhorses, ribs of pale wood curving up like the inside of a whale. He put his hand on it the way other men put their hands on things they love. "I am building her myself," he said. "Nights, mostly. She is going to be a beauty. And when she is finished, I am going to sail her down the whole length of the river, all the way to the sea, and I am going to see the ocean before I die." He said it plainly, the way you would say you were going to the store. Not a fantasy, a plan. I had never in my life met a person who had a plan that was only for themselves, that no one had assigned them, that served no purpose except joy. In my world, every plan was a duty. His was a door. He never did see the ocean. I have stood at the edge of 3 of them since, and every single time I have thought of him and that unfinished boat, and I have looked at all that water for both of us. He took his book of poems out that afternoon, the one with the torn cover, and he read to me while the rain came down, and he was not a good reader. He stumbled over the long words, but I have never in 84 years heard anything more beautiful than that boat mechanic sounding out poems he did not fully understand because he thought they were worth the trouble. He did not know I was crying, or he knew, and he was kind enough to keep reading and let me. If you have someone in your life like that, someone who makes plans just for the joy of them, someone who reads to you in the rain, I hope you know what you have. So many of us do not know until it is gone. I did not know until it was gone. On the fourth night, there was a bonfire down on the staff beach, the part of the shore where the hotel workers gathered after their shifts. Emmett took me. I wore a plain dress I had borrowed from one of the chambermaids, and no pearls, and no gloves. And I danced barefoot in the sand, with cooks, and boatmen, and laundry girls. And someone had a fiddle, and someone had a guitar. And it was the loudest, warmest, most alive place I had ever stood. These were people who owned nothing, and they were more generous than anyone I had ever met. They shared their beer and their food and their laughter with a stranger, with the vain girl, without a second thought. because Emmett vouched for me, and that was enough. There was a girl there named Ruthie, a laundry girl, 16 years old, with a laugh like a bell and a bad habit of finishing everyone's sentences. She took a shine to me right away, told me my hands were too soft, and put a cup of something warm in them, and made me try the potatoes her mother had sent up from the kitchen. There was an old cook named Sully who had worked the lakes for 40 years and could tell the weather from the way the loons flew. There was a boy who could not have been more than 14. Everyone called him Pip, who swept the ballroom floors and wanted, more than anything, to learn the piano. And Emmett was teaching him, one lesson at a time, for nothing. Because that is the kind of thing Emmett did. I sat in that firelight, and I watched a family that no one had arranged, held together by nothing but choice. And I thought about my own beautiful, frozen, unhappy people up the hill in their silk, and I understood which of us was actually poor. I am telling you their names, Ruthie and Sully and Pip, on purpose. Remember them. It will matter before I am done. I remember standing at the edge of the firelight, watching Emmett throw his head back and laugh at something, and thinking, with a clarity that scared me, I would give up everything for this: the house, the name, the pearls, the understanding, all of it, for this. He walked me back along the shore that night, and at the tree line, before the lights of the hotel could reach us, he stopped. He took the compass out of his pocket, and this time he pressed it into my hand and closed my fingers around it. I want you to have this, he said. Not so you will remember me. I do not care about that. I want you to have it so that every time you feel yourself getting talked into something, you can hold it and remember. He tapped my closed fist. North is wherever you decide it is. Then he kissed me, once, and it was nothing like I had imagined, and everything I had never dared to. And I decided, standing there in the dark, with a brass compass in my fist, that I was not going to marry Preston Vane, that I was going to choose my own north, whatever it cost me. I want to tell you about one more thing that happened before Preston found out, because I did not understand what it meant until much later, and then I understood it completely. On the 5th morning, a waiter dropped a tray at breakfast, a whole tray, glasses and china, right beside our table, a terrible crash. The poor man went white. And Preston, without even looking up from his newspaper, said, in that smooth, cool voice, that the fellow would of course be paying for the breakage out of his wages, and that this was what happened when you hired the wrong sort of people. The waiter was shaking. He was somebody's father. And Preston went back to his paper, as though he had commented on the weather. My mother nodded along. Everyone at the table nodded along. And I sat there in my nice dress, and I felt something cold move through me, because I realized that to Preston Vane, people were either assets or expenses, and there was no third category, and there never would be. And one day, inevitably, I would move from the first column to the second. I did not know yet how right I was, but I felt it. Your body knows the truth long before your mind is brave enough to say it out loud. I should have known that a decision that large does not go unnoticed. Preston found out on the 5th day. I still do not know exactly how. Someone saw us, I suppose. A staff member looking to curry favour, or a guest with nothing better to do. The rich are always watching each other, and they are always watching the people who serve them. And a girl of my station spending her afternoons with a boat mechanic was not the kind of thing that stayed quiet for long. He did not shout. That was the frightening part. Preston Vane never shouted. He came to me in the reading room after dinner, and he sat down across from me, and he folded his hands, and he told me, in a voice as smooth and cold as the marble of his family's lobby, exactly what was going to happen. I was going to stop, immediately. I was going to accept his proposal at the gala on the final night, in front of everyone, and I was going to smile while I did it. And the boy, he said the word boy like it tasted bad. The boy would be dismissed from the hotel by morning, with no reference and no wages owed. And if I made any trouble at all, Preston would see to it that Emmett Shaw never found honest work at any respectable establishment in the region again. He had the reach to do it. We both knew he did. "You have to understand your situation, Eleanor," he said, and he almost sounded kind. "Your family has nothing. Nothing. Your father is a drunk, and your mother is a beggar in nice clothes, and you are one bad decision away from being nobody at all. I am offering you a life." He looked at me the way you look at a document before you sign it. Do not be sentimental. Sentiment is for people who can afford it. There it was again. The same law my mother had taught me. Love is a luxury. You cannot afford it. I went to my room and I sat on the edge of the bed and I took out the compass and I held it, and I was so afraid. Because Preston was right about one thing. My family did have nothing. If I refused him, I was not just ruining myself. I was ruining my mother, who had no way to survive except through me. And I could hear her voice. And I could hear his voice. And they were saying the same thing in two different tones. And the sentence was crushing me. We do not have the luxury of love. My mother came to my room that night. She had heard. Of course she had heard. She sat beside me and she took my hand. And for a moment I thought she might, for once, be my mother instead of my manager. And she said, "Eleanor, I know he is not what your heart wants. But hearts are foolish. And they get old women put out on the street." And then she said the thing I have never forgotten. The thing that told me she had chosen her fear over me a long time ago. She said, "I gave up my own Emmett once too. And look at me. I survived. You will survive this. Everyone does." I looked at her, and I understood that she was not trying to hurt me. She was trying to recruit me. She wanted me to make the same trade she had made, to lose the same thing she had lost. Because if I chose love, and it worked, then her whole life would stand revealed as the surrender it was. My freedom would be an accusation against her cage. She could not bear that, so she needed me in a cage of my own. That is the cruelest thing about people who have given up. They cannot stand to watch you refuse to. I told her I was tired. I told her I would do the right thing. She kissed my forehead and left, satisfied, and I lay awake all night with the compass in my hand, trying to decide whether I was brave enough to blow up my entire world for 6 days of happiness and the memory of a boy's laugh at a bonfire. I still had not decided when the final night came. The night of the gala, the night of the fire. If you have made it this far with me, thank you. I know it is a lot, an old woman and her ghosts. But we are almost to the part that matters, and I need you to hear it. So if you can, hit subscribe and stay with me to the end. This is the part I have never told anyone. The gala was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I have hated beautiful things a little ever since. The dance hall glowed. 400 people in silk and diamonds. Ice sculptures melting slowly on long tables. An orchestra, and Emmett at the piano at the front of it, in his one good jacket, not looking at me, because we both knew Preston was watching, because we both knew this was the last night. Outside, on the dock, they had set up the fireworks that would end the season. My mother had me in the pearls again. Preston had me on his arm. And I knew that within the hour he would stand up and propose in front of all those people. And I would have to answer. And I still did not know what I was going to say. I never had to answer. Because at 10:15, someone screamed the word that empties every grand wooden building in the world. Fire. I have spent 61 years trying not to see it, and I can still see all of it. The Lakemore was a palace made of dry old pine and varnish and dreams, and it went up like a struck match. Later, they would say it started in the kitchens, or in the fireworks, or in the electrical wiring that no one had bothered to inspect, because inspecting things is expensive, and the veins of the world do not like expenses. It does not matter where it started. What matters is how fast it moved. One moment there was music, and the next there was smoke pouring in from the ceiling, and then there was a sound I have no words for, the sound of 400 people realizing at once that the beautiful room is a trap. I lost my mother in the first 30 seconds. Not for good. She got out. She lived another 20 years. But in the crush and the smoke, her hand was torn from mine and she was gone, swept toward the doors with the rest. And I was knocked down, and a heel came down on my hand, and I could not get up, and the smoke was a living thing pressing me to the floor. And I remember thinking, with a strange calm, so this is how it ends, on the floor of a beautiful room, in my grandmother's pearls. I was 19 years old, and I had never once chosen anything, and I was going to die having lived a life that belonged to other people. And here is the thing I learned that night, the thing that decided the rest of my life. When the fire came, I found out who everyone was. Preston Vane, who was offering me a life, who told me sentiment was for people who could afford it, dropped my arm and ran. He did not look back. He did not reach for me. He put his hands on the shoulders of the people in front of him, and he shoved them out of his way. Women, old men, it did not matter. And he ran for the doors, and he saved himself, and he never once thought of me. That was my life. That was the harbour I was supposed to tie myself to for safety. It saved itself and left me in the smoke. And Emmett Shaw, who owned a compass and a harmonica and one good jacket, who had nothing, who I was told could give me nothing, came off that stage against the current of 400 fleeing people. And he came for me. I have thought about that so many times. Everyone was running one way. He was the only one running the other way. He found me in the smoke, near the collapsed serving tables where I had fallen, and he pulled me up, and his face was calm. That is what I remember. In all that terror, his face was calm, like a man reading a compass. This way. Stay low. Hold my hand, and do not look back. Just look at me. He got me out. He knew the building the way only a person who fixes things knows a building. He did not go for the grand doors where the crush of bodies was killing people. He took me through the kitchens, through the staff passages, through a laundry room, and out a service door I never would have found, into the cold, clean air of the night. And I was alive. I was outside. I was breathing. I was going to live. And then he turned around and went back in. There were people still inside. Staff. His people. The cooks and the laundry girls and the boatmen from the bonfire, trapped in the back of the burning building where no guest would ever think to look for them. And Emmett Shaw looked at me for 1 second, and he pressed his hand flat against the side of my face, and he said the last words he ever said to me. Remember what I told you. North is wherever you decide it is. Then he squeezed my hand once, and he let go, and he went back into the fire to get the others out. He got 4 of them out before the roof came down. 4 people who lived long lives and had children and grandchildren because a poor boy with nothing decided their lives were worth his. He never came out the 5th time. They found him 3 days later, in the ruins, near the service door, close to the way out. He had gotten so close. He was always going to get everyone out but himself. That was who he was. That was who they told me could give me nothing. I stood on that lawn in my ruined dress with my grandmother's pearls still around my throat, and I watched the Grand Lakemore Hotel burn to the waterline, and I understood, finally and completely, the great lie I had been raised inside. They told me love was the luxury. They told me love was the thing I could not afford. But standing there, watching the difference between the man who ran and the man who went back, I understood that it was the other way around. Everything else was the luxury, the name, the money, the safety, the harbour. Those were the things you could lose in an hour. Love, the real kind, the kind that runs the wrong way through a burning building, that was the only thing that had ever been worth having. And I had almost let them talk me out of it. I had almost married the man who ran. I did not marry Preston Vane. I want to tell you the rest, because I think the ending matters, and I think some of you need to hear it. I walked away from all of it. When my mother recovered from her fright, she resumed her campaign because grief could not compete with her fear, and she still wanted the marriage. Preston, to his credit or his shame, still would have taken me. Being nearly burned alive had not improved him, but it had not ruined his balance sheet either. And I was still the right kind of girl. My mother begged me. She used every weapon she had, and I held that brass compass in my hand, and I said the only word that has ever set anyone free. No. I left. I had $11 and a compass and a borrowed suitcase, and I took a train in whatever direction it happened to be going, and I built a life with my own two hands. It was hard. I will not pretend it was not. There were years that were very lean, and there were nights I was afraid, and there was no harbour waiting anywhere to tie myself to. I worked. I typed, and I taught, and I clerked, and I saved. And slowly, one honest year at a time, I built something that was mine, not given to me, not arranged for me, mine. I did marry, eventually, years later. A good man named Walter, who fixed radios and made me laugh, and never once in 40 years told me what to want. He knew about Emmett. I told him early, because I would not build a life on a secret. And Walter, bless him, he understood. He said a woman who had been loved, like that, had a bigger heart than most, not a smaller one, and there was room in it for two. He was right. I loved Walter truly, and I love his memory still. But I want to be honest with you, because you have stayed with me this long. There is a room in my heart that has been Emmett's for 61 years, and no one else has ever been allowed inside, and no one ever will be, and I would not give up that room for anything on this earth. Do you remember the names I told you to remember? Ruthie, the laundry girl with the laugh like a bell; Sully, the old cook; Pip, the boy who wanted to learn the piano. Emmett got 4 people out of that fire before the roof came down, and I did not know for many years who the 4 were. But I found out. I found out because 31 years later, a man knocked on the door of my little house, a grown man in his 40s with grey coming into his hair, and he stood on my porch and he said, "You will not remember me, but my name is Pip, and a man named Emmett Shaw carried me out of a fire when I was 14 years old, and it took me 30 years to track down the girl he loved, because I wanted her to know that the 4 of us are still here. We are still here because of him. Ruthie has grandchildren now. And I play the piano, Mum. I play it every single day. He taught me the first 4 songs I ever learned, and I have been playing them for 30 years, and I will play them until I die. I made that man sit on my porch, and I made him a cup of coffee, and I cried in a way I had not cried in decades. And then he sat down at my old upright piano, and he played, and I closed my eyes, and for about 3 minutes, a boy I had loved for 6 days in 1928 was alive again in my living room. That is what Emmett Shaw left behind. Not money, not a name carved on a building. He left behind living people who play songs he taught them, and that outlasts any fortune the Vanes ever built. I never had money. I never wanted it again, not the way they wanted it. I raised 2 children in a small house, and I taught them the only thing I know for certain, which is that North is wherever you decide it is, and that the people who tell you love is a luxury are only trying to talk you into their own cage. My daughter is a doctor now. My son builds boats, and he does not know why that made me cry the first time he told me, and I never explained. My mother died, still believing she had been sensible. We made a kind of peace at the end, the peace you make with someone you have decided to stop being angry at, because the anger costs you more than it costs them. But I never told her she was right, because she was not, and I never once let her hold the compass. I still have it. It sits on my windowsill in the morning light, worn smooth from 2 thumbs now instead of one, 61 years of mine on top of his. It does not point north anymore. The mechanism gave out decades ago, and it just spins free now, which Emmett, I think, would have found perfect. North is wherever you decide it is. Even the compass finally learned. So here is what a burning hotel taught a 19-year-old girl, and what I would like to leave with you tonight. The people who love you the safest are not always the people who love you the most. Anyone can hold your arm when the music is playing. The question, the only question that has ever mattered, is who runs toward you when the room catches fire. Find that person. And if you have already found them, and someone is telling you that you cannot afford them, that they are the wrong family, or the wrong money, or the wrong side of town, I want you to hold something in your hand, anything at all, and remember an old woman and a boy on a dock. And remember that love was never the luxury. It was the only thing that was ever real. That is my story. 6 days, 1 compass, and a boy who ran the wrong way through a fire so the rest of us could grow old. If this reminded you of someone, or if it reached you tonight when you needed it, share it with a person who needs to remember that it is not too late to choose their own north. Drop a comment and tell me about the one who ran toward you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.